Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to sqadia.com. My name is Mohammad Osama, and today we are talking about the cord reflexes in neurophysiology. And the topic that we're going to cover in this lecture is organization of spinal cord. So, in this topic, we're going to talk about the organization, in which we're going to talk about the sensory neuron, the motor neurons, and the interneurons. And specifically, we're also going to talk about the anterior motor neuron, also known as the alpha motor neuron, and we're also going to talk about the gamma motor neuron as well. So when we talk about the sensory information, so it is provided to the nervous system via the receptors and the sensory neurons. So all of our senses are actually perceived by receptors, even if it is a vision or it is hearing or it is touch or it is smell. So for example, if we talk about touch, so it is perceived by mechanical receptors, and then through the help of the sensory neurons it is then taken up to the central nervous system or to the spinal cord. These sensory information can also rise from visceral organs as well, and once it reaches the spinal cord, then it has different pathways that it can adopt. It can either be involved in a reflex via the interneuron or via the anterior motor neuron. It can be a monosynaptic or polysynaptic reflex, or it can even travel upwards to the higher centers of the central nervous system, such as the brain, and it can go through the different type of processing of that information which is involved in the decision making. So when we talk about the organization of spinal cord for motor function, so here we have a cross section of the spinal cord, and here we can see we have the sensory neuron, which is bringing the information from the sensory receptors. Then we have the interneuron, and after the interneuron we have the anterior motor neuron. So one thing that is important to understand is that, for example, if we take the example of skin, so here we have receptors or free nerve endings which are serving as receptors, and they perceive the information of, for example, a pin prick, and that information is taken up from the sensory neuron to from the receptor to the spinal cord, where it terminates at the interneuron. Now the cell body of the sensory neuron is not in the spinal cord, instead it is out of the spinal cord, where it is known as the dorsal root ganglion. Now the interneuron connects the sensory neuron with the motor neuron, and the motor neuron cell body is actually located in the spinal cord at the level of the you can see here anterior horn, and from this anterior horn the motor neuron arises, and then it takes the message away from the spinal cord to the muscles, for example, which are known as the effector organs. It is also possible that sometimes the sensory neuron terminates directly onto the motor neuron or the anterior motor neuron, and that is known as a monosynaptic reflex. Now here once again we have the cross section of the spinal cord. We have the gray matter and the white matter. So the cell bodies are actually in the gray matter, and the fibers or the ascending and descending tracts are in the white matter. So here we can see this is known as the dorsal root, which is actually the sensory neuron which has this cell body in the dorsal root ganglion, and here it is also mentioned sensory neuron or the soma, which is the body of the cell, and then it can either terminate directly onto the anterior motor neuron, or it can directly terminate on the interneuron, which then terminates on the motor neuron. So motor neuron takes the message away from the spinal cord to the effector organs, where different type of activities occur, such as muscular contraction. Now talking about the alpha motor neurons, these are actually lower motor neurons, and the cell bodies of these alpha motor neurons are present in the anterior motor horn or the ventral motor horn, so it is present in the spinal cord. Moreover, they are multipolar because here we have the cell body, and the anterior motor neuron starts from here, and it takes the message away from the spinal cord to the muscle, for example, and then it terminates on different fibers, and it activates different fibers on stimulation, and a collection of the fibers that one single motor neuron stimulates is known as the motor unit. And because it excites or it terminates on numerous muscle fibers or fibrils, it causes contraction of numerous muscle fibers, and that is why it is multipolar. And as I already mentioned, the collection of the motor neuron with its muscle cell fibers, which it is actually exciting or supplying, this collectively is known as a motor unit. And motor unit always act as a one unit. So if there is stimulation of the motor neuron, all of the muscle fibers that are supplied by that motor neuron would be stimulated and they would contract. It is all or none phenomena. So here we can again see that this is the alpha motor neuron and it is stimulating numerous muscle fibers, and that is the reason that it is known as we already mentioned, multipolar neuron. So type A alpha motor nerve fibers are those specific nerve fibers which actually stimulate or which actually supply the extrafusal fibers of the muscle, which are actually the true fibers which are made up of sarcomeres and actin and myosin filaments, and which are responsible for the contraction of that individual muscle. And when they reach there, they branch and they enter the muscle, these alpha motor neurons, and they stimulate more than one fibers and they make a complete motor unit, and that's how they innervate the large skeletal muscle fibers. On the other hand, in addition to the alpha motor neurons, there are also another type of neurons which are known as the gamma motor neurons, and there is a structure which is known as the muscle spindle, which is made up of the intrafusal skeletal muscle fibers. And gamma motor neurons stimulate or they supply the contractile part of those muscle spindles or the intrafusal muscle fibers. So here we can see this is the gamma motor neuron, this is the muscle spindle, and this is the non-contractile sensory part of the muscle spindle, and at the extremes at both ends we have the contractile part of the intrafusal muscle fiber or the muscle spindle, which is actually stimulated by the gamma motor fiber or the gamma motor neuron, which is smaller in diameter as compared to the alpha motor neuron. So it is located in the spinal cord and anterior horns. It is smaller than those of the alpha motor neurons and is about 5 micrometers in diameter. And here we can see that gamma motor neurons transmit impulses through the much smaller type A gamma motor nerve fibers, which are smaller than the alpha motor neurons. And here we see that this is an alpha motor neuron which is going and supplying different type of muscles, and between these two extrafusal muscle fibers there is a muscle spindle or the intrafusal muscle fiber, which is known as in green color, and this dotted line is actually the gamma motor neuron which is going and supplying the two extremes, the contractile part of the intrafusal fibers or the muscle spindle. So they go to the small interfusal fibers as I already mentioned, and they control the basic muscle tone by contracting and altering the response and the phenomena of the muscle spindle and the stretch reflex. They control the resting muscle tone of that muscle. Then, as I already mentioned, there is an interneuron which connects the sensory neuron to the motor neuron, and sometimes there is basic processing information also occurs in this neuron, and sometimes it is even absent and there's just a monosynaptic reflex phenomena. So that was all about the basic organization of the spinal cord in terms of the spinal cord reflexes. I hope you learned something new out of it. So stay tuned to sqadia.com and keep on watching more lectures like this for more information on the spinal cord related reflexes. Thank you very much.